The Candle House Mystery, The Quiet Vanishing of Eleanor Voss. Sometimes the quietest lives leave behind the loudest questions. In the snow-covered folds of the Catskill Mountains, long before GPS and digital footprints, long before towns were measured in Yelp reviews or drone flyovers, there existed a stretch of woods where time wandered slowly, if it wandered at all. Nestled in those woods, just beyond the county line, beyond the last telephone pole, and before the trees turned so thick you couldn't hear your own footsteps, stood a strange little house, old, weathered, leaning gently like it was nodding off to sleep. People called it the Candle House, not because it sold candles, nothing was sold there, but because at exactly dusk, no matter the time of year, its windows lit up with 100 tiny glows, some real, some electric, but all of them flickered as if being breathed on, yellow light in deep blue shadows. In winter, with snow piled up like icing on the rooftop and icicles hanging like glass teeth from the eaves, it looked like something from a forgotten fairy tale. And the woman who lived inside, the one no one quite knew but everyone sort of remembered, was named Eleanor Voss. She moved to Arkenridge in 1950, a town so small that the sheriff also mowed lawns in the summer and handed out cider at Christmas. Population back then was around 900. Today, it isn't much more. Eleanor wasn't exactly welcomed, nor was she rejected. She simply arrived, bought the old McKenna place with a thick envelope of cash and no questions. She drove a green Plymouth, kept to herself, attended the odd town meeting during her first few years, then gradually faded into the background. She was polite, quiet, always dressed in muted tones, grays, browns, dark greens. She wore her silver hair pinned in a low bun, and if she smiled, it was more with her chin than her mouth. You saw it when she passed, the subtle lift, the brief acknowledgement that you existed, and then she was gone, always heading somewhere, always back to the Candle House. What she did for money was a mystery to most. Some said she painted, others thought she was a retired teacher. There were rumors, always harmless, that she had come from New York City after some heartbreak or a scandal, though no one ever produced proof. The only clear thing was that Eleanor lived alone, had no visible family, and never seemed to age. Every few weeks, she'd be spotted at the co-op, buying tins of tea and small bags of rice. Once a month, she'd mail letters, always in cream-colored envelopes, always with a single bird drawn in the corner where a return address should go. In 1968, she donated 5 of her paintings to the town library, landscapes mostly, foggy hillsides, winter trees, a frozen pond with a lone figure standing beside it. The figure had no face. That same year, Eleanor stopped attending anything public. No more town meetings, no bake sales. Her house became quieter, if that was possible. The candles remained, but the woman was less and less seen. Still, no one worried. Some people are just built for solitude, or so they said. It wasn't until February of 1975, during one of the longest, coldest stretches of winter in Arkenridge history, that anyone noticed something was wrong. It started with groceries. Ruth Benning had been delivering a small box of staples to Eleanor every 2 weeks for nearly 5 years. It wasn't a formal arrangement, just something Ruth had offered after a brief chat at the co-op one spring. Eleanor never invited her inside, but she always left exact payment in a small wooden box just outside the door, beneath the eaves. There was always a note, folded twice, with the same graceful handwriting. Thank you, R.B. Leave them at the side steps. E. That winter, the snow had been relentless. Whole roads disappeared under drifts. Cars vanished until April. Ruth, who drove an old Dodge truck with chains on the tires, made her delivery as usual on February 2nd. The air was sharp enough to burn the inside of your nose, and the sky was the kind of low gray that made noon feel like dusk. She left a box containing lentils, matches, 3 cans of peaches, and a small jar of honey. Eleanor had asked for honey in her last note, a specific brand from a beekeeper 2 counties over. Ruth had made the extra drive. She liked Eleanor, or rather, she respected her distance. But on February 16th, when Ruth returned with the next delivery, she found the previous box still sitting by the steps. The honey was frozen solid. The peaches had burst in their cans. No payment, no new note. The wooden box had a thin dusting of snow on top. Ruth frowned, tapped her gloved fingers against the door, waited, knocked harder. Nothing. She walked around to the side and peered through the frosted kitchen window. The curtains were drawn, but she saw no movement, no glow of a stove, no steam, no Eleanor. Ruth went home, thought it over. Then, the next morning, she called the sheriff. Sheriff Arthur Millen had been with the town since '52. His badge was dulled from years of being wiped with his shirt sleeve, and his gut had long since become part of his silhouette. He wasn't the kind of man who believed in making things dramatic, but even he admitted later that something about the way Ruth spoke on the phone had settled heavy in his chest. He and Deputy Holloway drove out the next morning. Snow crunched beneath the cruiser tires, the engine growling against the cold. By the time they reached the candle house, the sun was just barely rising, casting everything in a pale lavender light. No footprints, no tire marks, just wind and ice and the sigh of trees shifting in the roots. They found the front door locked as usual, the windows latched. There was no sign of forced entry. They let themselves in with the key Ruth found beneath the stone frog beside the porch. Something she'd seen Eleanor use once years ago. Inside the house was still. That was the word both Millen and Holloway used in their report. Still. Not abandoned, not ransacked, just paused, like someone had stepped out for a moment and never returned. The wood stove was cold. The kettle on top blackened. Beside it sat a small cup with a tea bag still inside. The bed was made, slippers aligned at the foot, no suitcase missing, no signs of packing. Mail had begun to pile up in a shallow basket near the door, mostly junk, a few personal letters. One envelope marked confidential from a medical office. On the nightstand in the bedroom, a half-burned candle, a worn paperback copy of Wuthering Heights, and a small wooden carving of a bird. The bird had one eye carved in. The other was just a smooth hollow, never finished. Her winter coat still hung on the hook. Boots sat neatly beside it. Wallet in the drawer, keys on the windowsill. No sign of Eleanor, not inside, not outside, not anywhere. They searched the woods. Volunteers came out with snowshoes, flashlights, dogs. People who hadn't spoken to Eleanor in years combed the trees and shouted her name. For days they trudged through snowdrifts, checking frozen ponds, clearing paths to hunting cabins. Nothing. No disturbed snow, no blood, no footprints, fresh or old. Nothing. It was like she had simply dissolved into the cold. Sheriff Millen filed a missing persons report. There wasn't much else to do. They had no leads, no signs of a crime. The official record listed her status as voluntary disappearance. Unofficially, the town whispered. Some believed she'd wandered off into the woods and frozen to death. Others said she'd never existed at all, not really. That the candle house had always been there, lit by ghost light. That Eleanor was just a name attached to something older, stranger. But those were just stories. The house remained quiet as always. The candles stopped. That, more than anything, unsettled the town. Each night since 1950, those windows had glowed. Dozens of them. Software flickering, like the house itself was breathing. But now, dark. Completely dark. And yet, no one moved in. No one bought the property. No one even tried. Because once a house like that goes quiet, you don't ask why. You just let it be. The house stood untouched for weeks. In most towns, a missing person leaves a gap, a note on a community board, an interview on the local news, a prayer said out loud at the supper table. In Arkenridge, it left a silence, a widening space where a woman used to be. Her name was spoken with a kind of hush. People said things like, Eleanor, bless her, or poor Miss Voss, and then changed the subject. The sheriff's file stayed thin. No new leads, no sightings. Eventually, the case was archived under a small handwritten tab. Voss, E. Missing, February 1975. The candle house, already sagging with age, began to shift in its foundation. The snow melted, then froze again. Mail accumulated on the floor, poked through the mail slot like forgotten fingers. Sheriff Millen made sure the utilities were suspended. He had the locks changed and kept the new key in a drawer he rarely opened. Spring came, and with it, something strange, a postcard. It arrived at the Arkenridge Public Library on May 2nd, 1976. Nearly 15 months after Eleanor disappeared, the card itself was simple, just a photograph of a Scandinavian lake, deep blue water, a single rowboat drifting across the frame. It was addressed simply to the Arkenridge Library, Arkenridge, New York, 12409. There was no sender listed, but on the back, in a steady, slanted hand, I still paint. The light is better here. E. Tobias near, the head librarian, nearly tossed it in the recycling bin. The town sometimes received mail for dead people, long-moved families, or businesses that hadn't existed since Roosevelt was in office. But something made him pause. Maybe it was the way the E curved, flat-topped and graceful, like a dancer mid-bow. He remembered the books. Years ago, Eleanor had donated a small stack of bird guides and one rare volume of botanical studies. Inside one of them was a handwritten note, brief, elegant, written in the same style. For those who know how to read in quiet. A.V. Tobias pulled that old book from the shelf and held it next to the postcard. It was the same hand, same slant, same peculiar spacing between words. He brought it to Sheriff Millen. Millen didn't say much, just studied it for a long time, rubbing the back of his neck. There was a postmark, faint, partial. It looked like it had been stamped in Europe, maybe Sweden, maybe Finland. It was impossible to tell. They didn't tell the press. There was no press to speak of. Just a phone call to Deputy Holloway and a quiet note added to the file. That was all, until the second postcard came. It arrived 6 weeks later, this time addressed to the town co-op grocery. The front showed an old moss-covered stone bridge in what looked like a foggy forest. On the back, The trees are different, less hollow. Still, I miss the owls. E. Again, no return address. Again, the same handwriting. Again, the town said nothing. Sheriff Millen filed it, added a note. Evidently sent from outside U.S. postmarks unreadable. No known relatives. The staff at the co-op displayed the postcard in the window for a week, then removed it after some of the older residents began to cross themselves as they walked by. People whispered. Had Eleanor left the country? Had she been helped? Was she hiding? Or was someone playing a very long, very strange joke? No one knew. But in that summer of '76, with the bicentennial flags flapping from every porch and fireworks echoing through the hills, Arkenridge was not quite at ease. Something was off. The way heat hung too heavy some afternoons, the way crows clustered in silence on telephone wires, the way the candle house, empty and sun-faded, seemed to lean further away from the road, as if trying to whisper something to the forest. Then came postcard 3. This one arrived in September, addressed to the town bakery, a picture of an old key on a velvet cushion. On the back, doors are not always meant to open, but some still knock. E. It felt like a message, though no one could say to whom. The handwriting was identical, still clean, confident, slightly whimsical. The postmark again was blurred, just a suggestion of place. Europe, perhaps, or a small island. That week, a rumor spread. A woman in Wyndham, 2 towns over, claimed she'd seen someone who looked like Eleanor. Just a flash of a face through a train window as it pulled away. The sheriff followed up. No one matching Eleanor's description had bought a ticket that day. The station clerk remembered nothing unusual. Still, the story lingered. Was she alive, running, hiding? And if so, why? By now the postcards had taken on a kind of myth. They were never sent to the same place twice. After the bakery came one to the hardware store, then one to the post office, and finally, almost a year after the first, one addressed directly to Sheriff Millen. It arrived folded inside an envelope, unlike the others. Plain white, handwritten, Sheriff Millen, Arkenridge, New York, no return address. Inside, a photo of a single wooden chair in an empty room, sunlight falling across it. The message, some things are best seen from stillness. I hope the sparrows returned. E. Millen didn't show it to anyone, not right away. He sat in his office for a long time, the postcard resting on his lap, fingers drumming against the desk. That night, he visited the candle house, just to look, just to see. The grass had grown high along the walkway. The windows were dusted with cobwebs. The wooden trim was beginning to rot where the gutter had fallen loose. But otherwise, the house looked just as it had in February, frozen in time. Millen didn't go inside, just stood there in the fading light. At one point, he thought he saw something move in the upstairs window, just a flicker of shadow. He stood still for 20 minutes, watching. Nothing, no light, no shape, just the wind. He left without entering and never went back. The last postcard came in 1980. No one knew why they stopped. Maybe the sender grew tired. Maybe Eleanor had truly gone wherever she was going. The final card was addressed to no one specific. Just, to whom it may concern Arkenridge, it died. It was black and white. A photograph of a single candle in a window. On the back, I'm tired now. Thank you for remembering me. Don't wait anymore. That was all. The sheriff showed it to the town council. He added it to the file. Then he closed it for good. By 1981, the candle house had stood untouched for 6 years. The grass around it had grown tall and brittle. Ivy crept along the back wall, curling into the gutters. A shutter on the west side hung crooked, flapping in windstorms like a loose jawbone. And yet, somehow, the house didn't look abandoned. It looked asleep. No one tried to buy it, not once. Sheriff Millen joked that the house had its own will, like a dog left behind by an old owner, waiting loyally for someone who might never return. It was as if the town had quietly agreed not to disturb it, like waking the house might bring something with it they weren't ready to see. The postcards had stopped, but they still lingered in people's minds. Some were convinced Eleanor was alive. Others said the notes were fake, crafted by someone who wanted to turn her into folklore. But those who had known her even a little, who had seen the way she never needed to explain her stillness, believed they were real. "She had that kind of silence," said Ruth Benning once, "the kind that leaves a trace." Still, life moved on. It had to. The library got a new roof. A gas station replaced the old horse barn near the crossroads. A couple from Connecticut moved in down the road and opened a pottery studio. But the candle house stayed empty. And then, in November of 1983, it burned. It happened just after the first snowfall. The air was sharp, dry, the sky clean as bone. A pair of hikers had been out early walking the edge of the woods behind the old quarry when they saw the glow, an orange shimmer behind the treetops. At first, they thought it was sunrise catching frost. Then they smelled the smoke. By the time the fire trucks arrived, it was already too late. The front of the house was engulfed. Flames licked the porch railings, devouring the brittle wood with a hunger that didn't match its surroundings. Sparks spiraled into the cold air like fireflies gone mad. It took 2 hours to control. When it was over, only a charred frame remained. Walls collapsed inward. The roof had folded like a dying flower. All that stood was a piece of chimney, blackened and tall, like a monument. The fire chief, Rob Eldon, filed a report 2 days later. His conclusion, chimney fall. The flue, he said, had been cracked. If someone had lit a fire, maybe a trespasser or a squatter, and left it unattended, that would have been enough. But nothing inside suggested anyone had been there. There were no footprints, no debris indicating recent human activity, no sleeping bag, no cigarette butts. The wood had been old, dry. A spark might have been all it took. That's what the report said. But Eldon never quite believed it. "I remember how it smelled," he told a reporter years later. "Not like a normal house fire. It was clean, like something had been waiting to burn." In the weeks that followed, people came to see the ruins. Not many, but enough. They walked the edges, looked for signs, picked through ash with the tips of their boots. Nothing was left. Even the stone frog, where Eleanor used to hide her key, was cracked in half. Someone nailed a wooden cross into the snow where the porch had been. No one knew who. And then, in late December, a young woman named Leah Prentice saw something she couldn't explain. Leah was 22 at the time, a part-time teacher's assistant at the elementary school. She'd grown up in Arkenridge, had been one of the children who used to watch the candle house flicker from a school bus window in the early dusk of winter. She said the house had always comforted her in a strange way, like a lighthouse on a shore she couldn't quite reach. After the fire, she visited the site a few times, always near dusk. She brought a thermos of tea and sat on a stump just outside the blackened foundation. "I don't know why I did it," she later said. "I just felt like someone should sit there." On the third night, she saw a light, a small, flickering one, in the exact place where the upper bedroom window used to be, just for a moment, then gone. She thought it was a trick, her eyes, the wind. She told no one. But a week later, someone else saw it too. Harold Greeley, the town's oldest living resident, claimed he saw a damn candle dancing in the night as he walked his dog past the hill above the ruins. He said it looked just like it used to, yellow, slow, flickering. "I know what I saw," he told Sheriff Millen, "and I don't scare easy." Others came forward. A pair of teenage boys, fooling around with a camcorder, claimed they captured a brief glow on film. A mail carrier swore he heard humming in the trees near the trail behind the property. A visiting priest from Kingston said he felt the weight of a prayer left unfinished when he stepped within the stone outline of what used to be the living room. The town, for a while, buzzed again, not with fear, but with something older. Wonder. Theories resurfaced. Some believed Eleanor had never left, that she had simply moved to the edge of somewhere else, that the postcards were a bridge between here and there. Others said she had died in that house, perhaps long before the town noticed that her presence had lingered and the fire had released her. There was a story that spread one winter, told mostly by teenagers and passed around at sleepovers or between lockers, that Eleanor Voss had been a witch, a quiet one, not the curse you kind, but a keeper of shadows, a painter of doors that opened only for those willing to disappear. They said the paintings she gave the library were maps. No one could prove anything. And eventually, the whispers quieted again. The ruins faded under moss and weeds. Time passed, but the feeling didn't. You could still feel it if you walked that hill at the right time of year. A kind of pause, a breath held in the trees, waiting, listening. For what? No one knew. To understand the weight of Eleanor's disappearance, you had to understand the shape of her life, not as it looked from the outside, but the quiet creases of it. The folds most people never noticed. Long before she became the woman in the candle house, Eleanor Voss had been a quiet girl in a town just as small as Arkenridge, perhaps smaller. Born in 1931 in Crossfield, New York, Eleanor's earliest years were spent in a wooden house with cracked shutters and a tin roof that groaned in heavy rain. Her father, Silas, died of tuberculosis when she was 3, and her mother, Margaret, never remarried. Theirs was not a joyful home, but not an unkind one either. It was muted. Margaret taught English at the local high school and believed in 2 things, books and order. Eleanor was expected to read a new one each week by the time she was 7. Not picture books, real ones, Dickens, Austen, Poe. When she drew in the margins of Jane Eyre, Margaret punished her by making her copy out passages by hand for a week. Still, Eleanor kept drawing. It began in secret, on the backs of receipts, old envelopes, butcher paper. She drew birds at first, not cartoon ones, not blue jays with big eyes, but precise, studied forms, talons, wing curvature, beak sharpness. Then came eyes, not bird eyes, human ones, always alert, always centered on the viewer. By the time she was 12, she was painting at night after her mother slept. Oils stolen from a neighbor's attic, canvas made from stretched bed sheets. She never signed them, never showed them to anyone. She didn't need to. The work was hers because no one else would have made it. Margaret found out once, just once. She burned 3 canvases in the fireplace. Eleanor didn't cry. She painted them again the next night. By 16, she was known in Crossfield only as that Voss girl. Strange, sharp-eyed, never spoke unless spoken to, always watching. She graduated early, moved out as soon as she legally could, and from that moment forward, it was as if she had peeled herself away from the world, one layer at a time, until only the essential remained. People who saw her in those early years in Arkenridge, before the seclusion, before the candlelit myths, said she seemed like a woman made of glass, whole, beautiful in a certain light, but designed not to be touched. She rarely smiled, and when she did, it looked more like remembering than amusement. She painted constantly, for hours. Some days, she didn't go outside at all. Her windows, tall and slender, let in only the softest light. Candles were lit not just at dusk, but even during rainstorms and quiet mornings. She preferred shadows with flicker. The subjects of her art shifted over time. After birds and trees came people, but never full faces, always turned away, always partially obscured. A woman looking into a mirror that showed a forest. A man seated at a desk, hands but no head. A girl standing in an empty room, her shadow climbing the walls like vines. She gave away a few pieces, donated others, but many were never seen, hidden somewhere in the candle house, behind doors no one ever opened. Once, in 1972, a visiting professor from a college downstate came to Arkenridge on a quiet research trip. He stumbled upon the library exhibit featuring Eleanor's donated work. He reportedly spent an hour just standing in front of one painting. Stillness. A girl at a window, her back turned, snow falling gently outside. When he finally moved, he told the librarian, "This isn't a painting. It's an invitation." Years later, after the fire, one of Eleanor's old sketchbooks resurfaced. It had been left behind in a storage box at the town library, wedged between discarded almanacs and water-damaged encyclopedias. The spine was cracked, the pages brittle, but the drawings remained vivid. Most were of birds, as expected. But in the back, tucked between 2 unfinished sparrows, was a strange sequence of sketches. A room, drawn over and over. Same dimensions, same slanted window, same wood-grain floor, but each drawing showed something different in the room. In one, a chair facing the corner. In another, a mirror with no reflection. And in the final sketch, nothing, just the room. And on the floor, in one small corner, an X. Beneath it, in tiny cursive, "The Quiet Place." The librarian who found it, Anne Helms, a calm, skeptical woman not prone to drama, said she couldn't sleep for 2 nights after finding it. It was the emptiness, she said. It wasn't the X. It was what wasn't there. The town began to wonder if Eleanor's life had never been about being found or even understood, but about vanishing correctly, like a candle that doesn't go out in wind, but chooses when. People read meaning into her silence, the postcards, the light in the trees, the fire, the fact that no one, not once, ever found her body. There was one final theory, not well known, never printed, but passed around in whispers between those who lingered too long near the Candlehouse ruins. They said Eleanor Voss had been working on one last painting, a door, not symbolic, not metaphorical, a door. framed exactly to the measurements of her bedroom wall. Some claimed she had painted it, not to display it, but to open it, to step through, to leave this world not by vanishing into woods or by plane or by tragedy, but by entering her own creation. That somewhere beyond the edge of this place, in a room lit by soft candlelight, she still paints, not with brushes, but with memory. In the decades that followed the Candle House fire, Arkenridge remained largely unchanged. The road leading to the ruins became overgrown. The town's population aged. Children who once peered at the flickering windows from the school bus moved away, started families of their own, and forgot, mostly, but not entirely. The house left a shadow that wasn't easy to erase. It had folded itself into the bones of the town, into stories whispered across tables in the diner or at the tail end of long winter sermons. Even those who never saw the candlelight firsthand knew the name Eleanor Voss. She became legend, but not the kind you tell to scare. She wasn't a ghost. She wasn't a monster. She wasn't even a warning. She was a question, a quiet, flickering question that no one could answer. By the mid-1990s, the land where the Candle House once stood was put up for sale. No one bought it. The price dropped, then dropped again. A couple from Albany made an offer, something about building a weekend cabin, but backed out before the papers were signed. The realtor blamed market jitters. Privately, he admitted something else. Every time he walked the lot alone, he felt watched, not threatened, not unwelcome, just observed, like the trees remembered him, like the air was taking note. Then in 2001, something strange happened. The librarian, Tobias Neer, now gray-haired and mostly retired, was cleaning out the archives when he came across a folder he didn't remember filing. It wasn't labeled, just a manila envelope, thick with papers and smelling faintly of cedar and something older. Inside were 5 photographs, all black and white, all clearly taken in the interior of the Candle House, though no one knew when. One photo showed a long hallway floor covered in feathers. Another, a painting leaning against the wall, half finished. It showed a woman in profile, her face blurred by brushstrokes, a doorway behind her glowing faintly. Another showed a tea set, still full. And one more, the last one, showed Eleanor herself, or what they believed was Eleanor. She stood facing away from the camera, her hands at her sides, her shadow cast long against the wall, and in that shadow, something unusual. Her reflection in a mirror that wasn't visible in the photo, just her face, looking directly at the viewer, eyes calm, expression unreadable, and something faint, almost imperceptible, like candlelight glowing just behind her pupils. Tobias brought the folder to the town council. No one could explain it. No one could verify who took the photos. They were added to the historical archive, but not put on display. Some things were better left as quiet questions. Sheriff Millen passed away in 2006. He never spoke publicly about the case, but in a letter found in his desk, addressed to no one in particular, he wrote, "She was not lost, not to me. Some people disappear because they're taken, some because they run, and some people disappear because the world was never quite theirs to begin with. They were just borrowing it." There were reports still, now and then. A man camping nearby claimed he heard humming, soft, almost melodic, carried on the wind. He thought it was coming from the trees. A boy walking the trail said he saw footprints in fresh snow, bare feet, small, A woman who came to paint the woods in autumn said she felt like someone was painting her back. And in winter, always in winter, a few hikers reported seeing a faint flicker near the tree line, just for a moment, just enough to catch the breath. A single candle. There, then not. No one rebuilt on the lot. No one mowed the grass. Eventually, the woods reclaimed it. You can still find the foundation if you know where to look. Stones half swallowed by moss. A curve of brick suggesting what used to be the front steps. The rusted hinge of a gate that no longer swings, and sometimes, on very still nights, you can hear what sounds like the creak of a brush on canvas, or maybe just the wind. And somewhere, far from maps, far from borders or names, in a room with tall windows and no doors, a woman with silver hair and quiet hands still paints, not for galleries, not for money, but for memory, each stroke a fragment, each canvas a step away from the noise toward peace, toward silence, toward the candlelight that waits at the edge of all things. She was never meant to be solved, only seen and remembered. Story 2, The Moonlight Ledger, the accountant who vanished twice. There is a certain stillness that lives in numbers, a discipline, a promise of order, every column balanced, every cent accounted for. No secrets in the ledgers, no shadows in the margins. That was the comfort Alan Blythe always clung to. He wasn't known to be charming or adventurous or even particularly warm, but he was precise. And in a world of vague gestures and gray motives, precision has its own kind of gravity. Alan was an accountant. For 34 years, he had kept the books for a string of small businesses in and around Dobbins Ferry, a quiet river town tucked into the Hudson Valley of New York, a place that didn't quite bustle, didn't quite sleep. He was known simply as the man with the brown coat and the gray scarf. You'd see him at the same cafe every morning. Black coffee, one egg, always reading the classifieds. He had no wife, no children, no dog. He lived on the top floor of a red brick building with ivy climbing its sides like nature trying to remember something. He paid rent in exact change, counted slowly, deliberately, never in a rush. He had no online presence, no social media. His home phone number had not changed since 1986. And so, when he vanished on a foggy Thursday in November of 2004, it didn't make headlines. It barely made noise, but the mystery he left behind would ripple outward in eerie, inexplicable ways. It started with a voicemail, not left by Alan, but about him. On November 11th, his landlord, Maeve Donnelly, received a message on her answering machine at exactly 9:12 p.m. The caller didn't identify himself. The audio was grainy, but the voice was male, calm, almost too calm. You won't need to worry about the tenant in 3C. He won't be coming back. He's gone back to correct the books. Some debts go too deep to audit. You understand? Click. No return number, no name. Maeve thought it was a prank. Until the next morning, when Alan's door remained unopened, the blinds still drawn. The smell of burnt toast lingered in the hallway. His mailbox overflowed with circulars and bills. The police did a welfare check. Inside, everything was exactly as it should be. Too exactly. Coffee cup washed and dried. Bed made. Wallet and keys on the dresser. No sign of struggle. No blood. No broken window or open door. His calendar had a single note written in pencil under November 11th. Moonlight, final entry. That was it. The case was opened, then quietly shelved as another adult disappearance. No signs of foul play. No known enemies. just a quiet man who walked out of his life. Or so it seemed. It might have ended there had it not been for the notebook. 2 weeks after his disappearance, a janitor at the lakeside storage facility, where Allen kept a small unit rented since 1989, found a box labeled simply, "Do not shred." Inside ledgers, dozens of them, bound in hard black covers, dated in white ink. But they weren't company books. These weren't related to any of the businesses Allen worked for. They were personal. Dozens of names, dates, payments, locations. Most pages had only a single line. G. Marlowe, 1983, corrected Elkins Brothers. 1992, 14K, incomplete, Mara H. 1999, Red Room, closed. Some entries had symbols next to them. Others had strange red X's. A few pages had words written sideways in the margins. Repayment due in mirrors. Nothing is ever zeroed, just buried. Errors echo. At first, police assumed it was gibberish. Perhaps Allen was suffering a mental breakdown, but then a retired local detective, Richard Yancey, recognized one of the names, G. Marlowe, Gordon Marlowe. He died in 1983. Official cause, suicide. But the case had always bothered Yancey. Gordon had been an accountant, too. Young, bright, investigating internal fraud at a family-run lumber company just outside Dobbins Ferry. He was found in his office with an overdose of sleeping pills and a note that simply read, "It balances now." And here, in Allen's strange personal ledger, beside Gordon's name, corrected. The implications were chilling. Yancey, now in his 70s, reopened his own notes, dug out files long since yellowed with age. He compared dates, looked for patterns. What he found was unsettling. Most of the entries in Allen's notebooks corresponded to people who had either vanished, died suddenly, or had been connected to financial investigations. Many were never prosecuted. Some were cleared entirely. And yet, Allen had marked them all, as if he had kept a private record of unfinished audits, a spiritual balance sheet. But why? How? And how did Allen know them? That's when Yancey visited Allen's apartment personally. It had been cleaned out, officially. But in the bottom of the coat closet behind a warped floorboard, he found a thin black book, smaller than the others. It was titled The Moonlight Ledger. Inside, a single phrase written again and again in clean, exact script. They come back when it's quiet, when the books are out of balance. I've seen their shadows in the numbers. I owe them. I owe them all. There was something strange about the numbers. Detective Yancey had spent his entire adult life reading between the lines, interviews, witness statements, financial reports, but nothing prepared him for the quiet, creeping dread of Allen Blythe's private ledger. He studied it late at night, seated by the window of his one-bedroom house just outside of Hartsdale, snow piling against the sill. Each page felt heavier than the last, not because of the ink, but the intent. Allen wasn't keeping track of debts, he was collecting them. And according to the margins, something or someone had started collecting them from him. In the back of the Moonlight Ledger was a fold-out page taped carefully to the inside cover. Yellowed, fragile. It was a chart, a triangle. 3 names at the points. G. Marlowe, M. Harrow. A. Blythe. Below them, dates, cases, a network of names spiraling outward, each name marked with a symbol, some with a circle, others with a diagonal slash. Only 3 were marked in gold ink. Yancey recognized one immediately. M. Harrow. Milton Harrow. That name hadn't passed his lips in decades. Harrow had been a key witness in an embezzlement case in 1975. A real estate firm caught laundering retirement funds from senior clients. Harrow was the firm's internal auditor. The case fell apart. Witnesses went silent. One of the partners was found dead in a boating accident, and Harrow himself suffered a breakdown shortly after. He was admitted to a facility, released 3 years later, disappeared a year after that. No leads, no body, no trace until now. In Allen's ledger, beside Harrow's name, was one word: balanced. Yancey began reaching out to people who knew Allen personally. There weren't many. A few co-workers, polite but distant. A retired librarian who remembered him checking out old court records. A former cafe owner who recalled him once leaving a note in the tip jar that read, "Debts aren't always money." Then there was the woman, Iris Devane. She claimed to have been Allen's only friend, though even she admitted they weren't close by most standards. "We met at a financial ethics seminar in 1994, she told Yancey. "He asked me if I believed in moral interest." Yancey asked what that meant. Iris smiled faintly. "I think he meant karma, but in decimal form." She said Allen once invited her to his apartment for tea and ended up showing her his real work. He said, "Everyone else files taxes. I file the forgotten. I find the unpaid." At the time, she thought he was being poetic, maybe even teasing. But she remembered something else. He showed her a painting, unfinished, abstract, but haunting. It showed what looked like a balance sheet. Only instead of numbers, there were shadows, some reaching upward, some falling. At the top, a figure stood alone, arms outstretched like a scale. Where the head should have been, there was only a void. Underneath, a handwritten caption, "Only the quiet are counted." The deeper Yancey went, the more patterns emerged. There were 7 gold entries in the ledger, cases marked with a unique symbol resembling a crescent moon crossed with an arrow. Each one corresponded to a financial scandal. Each one ended with a missing person. And in each, Allen's handwriting made reference to something he called the rebalancing. In one margin, errors seek resolution. So do those who commit them, and those who clean up after. Then, in the spring of 2005, 5 months after Allen's disappearance, something chilling happened. A man claiming to be Allen Blythe walked into a small accounting firm in Poughkeepsie and applied for a job. He had identification, credentials, even a resume. But he looked younger than Allen should have. Mid-40s, not 61. When asked why he had no recent digital footprint, he replied, "Some numbers don't belong in systems anymore, they remember." He was hired, worked quietly for 4 days. On the 5th, he never came back. His desk was empty, his paperwork gone. The coffee mug he used was missing, and in the trash bin under a balled-up napkin, someone found a torn sheet of legal pad. On it, written in Allen's unmistakable hand, "I settled for." 3 remain, but they've started asking questions. They always do when the balance is due. Fingerprint analysis later confirmed the man's identity. It was Allen Blythe, or someone with Allen's fingerprints. But that was impossible, because dental records had just come back on a body found half buried in snow outside Irvington. The corpse had been frozen, preserving it for months. Age, early 60s, build, thin. Condition, deceased from apparent cardiac arrest. And the ID found in the pocket? Allen Blythe, with the exact same fingerprints. 2 bodies, 1 man, identical fingerprints, 5 months apart. The case was officially sealed pending federal inquiry, but Yancey wasn't done, because 3 weeks later another postcard arrived. It was addressed to R. Yancey in thick blue pen. No return address. Inside, a single piece of paper, heavy cardstock. On it, written in the same handwriting from the Moonlight Ledger, "I never left, just rebalanced. You're looking for me in the wrong system." And beneath that, a new name. L. Hemsworth, 1977, red balance, unpaid. Yancey had never heard of Hemsworth, but he ran the name through old databases, and what he found would take him to a hospital basement, a burned document archive, and the first witness who claimed to see Alan Blythe walking through a locked room. The hospital sat like a mausoleum over the Hudson. Ravenshill State, its name long removed from official registries, had once been a psychiatric institution known for its numbers therapy in the 1970s, a controversial and now forgotten method that believed individuals who suffered from severe guilt or delusion could find balance through mathematical reasoning. It was closed in 1981, quietly. No fanfare, no lawsuits, just boarded windows, an overgrown lot, and stories that no one wanted to admit they remembered. Yancey only found the connection because of that name, L. Hemsworth. It took days of digging, cross-referencing microfilm from old property records and donation logs. Eventually, in a yellowed budget ledger from Ravenshill's final year of operation, the name surfaced, Patient 08761. Hemsworth. Leonard entry, January 14th, 1977. Status, long-term observation, refuses medication, claims to be being recalculated. Therapist note, refers frequently to a figure called the adjuster, claims numbers won't stay still, appears to calculate invisible debts aloud when alone. The phrase stopped Yancey cold. The adjuster. It was the same title listed on the inside flap of Alan Blythe's smallest journal, scrawled in red pencil, filed under the adjuster, for when the system forgets to collect. Ravenshill had long been condemned, but one of its wings, the administrative archive, remained intact enough for limited access by special request. Yancey pulled favors, called in old contacts, wrote 2 letters, and on a cold Tuesday in April, he stood in front of a rusted security gate as a local sheriff unlocked the side entrance for him. "You'll have about 2 hours, the deputy said. "Place isn't exactly up to code." Inside smelled of mildew and history. The floors creaked like old memory. In a back office, behind a filing cabinet warped with water damage, Yancey found a locked drawer. Inside, a red folder labeled Hemsworth Leonard Unresolved. Its contents were sparse. A few therapy notes, a photograph, grainy, color faded, of a thin man sitting at a desk, staring directly into the camera. Behind him, chalkboard walls covered in equations, circles, arrows, and standing behind him, barely visible in the shadows, another man, out of focus, indistinct, but wearing a brown coat and a gray scarf. There was no recorded visit from Alan Blythe in the Ravenshill logs, no signed guest book, no mention of his name. But the resemblance in the photo was chilling, and even more haunting. On the back of the photo, someone had written, "Reconciled, but not by us," dated 1980. Hemsworth had disappeared just 3 months later, officially discharged to family care, but no family could ever be located. Yancey left the archive shaken. That night, he laid the photo on his kitchen table, turned off the lights, and sat in the quiet. He thought about Alan's ledger, the symbols, the postcards, the second body. What if Alan wasn't just keeping books? What if he was acting as a kind of handler, not of money, but of guilt? Tracking unfinished accounts between those who committed financial harm and those who suffered from it. Maybe even stepping in when the numbers refused to even out. But what terrified Yancey more was this. Alan had written that he still owed, and someone or something was collecting on him. 3 weeks passed. Then came the second sighting. A janitor working at the State Records Annex in Albany called Yancey directly, claiming to have seen that ghost guy in the basement. Yancey pressed for more. The janitor, a man named Ed, said he'd been taking trash to the lower bins around 3 a.m. when he passed by the microfiche room. A light was on. No one was supposed to be there. Inside, a man in a brown coat was seated, quietly scrolling through reels of old property tax files. He didn't look up, didn't speak. Ed claimed he just felt wrong, like watching something that didn't want to be watched. But the most disturbing part, the man was muttering numbers in perfect rhythm, like clock ticks. Ed wrote some down. 13,406.02, 4,792.77, 2.01, 0.00. Then silence. And then, as Ed watched from behind the shelves, the man stopped, stood, and left, leaving behind only a single piece of paper on the reader desk. Yancey drove up the same day. The paper was still there, stamped with the seal of a long-defunct trust account from 1964, and on the bottom, handwritten in red ink, "Some ledgers keep themselves, others need a witness." The name listed on the trust account? A. Blythe, but not Alan. Avery Blythe, Alan's father, a banker, never mentioned in any of Alan's records, but according to public archives, he had been investigated in 1964 for insider trading and falsified property deals. The case was closed. No charges filed. He died in 1972, heart failure, the same cause listed for Alan's corpse in Irvington. So the question deepened. Was Alan repaying his father's debt? Was the ledger his or inherited? Was this a legacy of guilt, of rebalancing? And who determined when the scales were even? That same week, Yancey received a phone call. No caller ID, no greeting, just a voice. Calm, quiet, exact. Alan's voice. "You've come too far into the margins, Richard. There's still a chance to stay out of the column. Forget the numbers. Forget me. Some debts bind more than families. Some you carry into the grave. Some you come back to pay." Click. Yancey didn't sleep that night. He began keeping lights on, started burning old files, took down his corkboard and burned the photographs. But it didn't stop the numbers. On his mirror, written in steam after a hot shower, plus 1.00. On the inside of his mailbox flap, scribbled in Sharpie, "Unpaid," on the side of a parked car outside his house. Balance pending, Y4421, his badge number. And then one night, a final message, a letter, no stamp, slipped under his door. On it, a list, 7 names. The final one, R. Yancey, witness, balance, 0.00, and beneath it, a circle, gold, closed, perfect. It snowed the night Richard Yancey disappeared. Heavy flakes, quiet storm, no wind, just the kind of snowfall that hushes an entire neighborhood, that makes the world feel paused. He was last seen leaving the corner store at 8:12 p.m. Milk, a pack of matches, a manila folder tucked under one arm. The cashier said he looked calm, tired, but not scared. Like someone who had just remembered something important. He never made it home. His car was found idling on Ridge Street the next morning. Driver's door closed, engine running, keys still in the ignition. One footprint in the snow led away from the vehicle, toward the woods. Only one. It stopped after 9 steps, and then nothing. No second print, no slide, just absence. As if Yancey had been erased mid-step. The folder was recovered from the passenger seat. Inside, a single document, one of Alan Blythe's original ledgers. This one, unlike any other. No names, no dates, just a drawing. A room with 3 doors. Above the doors were symbols. A circle, a triangle, a line that bent but never touched either. In the center of the room, a desk. And on the desk, a scale, not evenly balanced. One side dipped slightly lower. Underneath the drawing, if the books never close, the door never opens. Yancey's disappearance was never solved. No signs of struggle, no suspects, no reason. His home was left untouched for days. When his niece arrived to clean out the property, she found the lights all still on, and a candle burning in the bathroom, even though there was no wax on the floor, no candle holder, just flame. No one could explain it. There was no wick. Years passed. Alan Blythe's case went cold again. No new sightings, no further messages. But rumors continued. A woman in Albany claimed her late husband, a tax attorney, once spoke with a man who filed nightmares like receipts. He kept a journal of all his regrets, said he was on installment with something bigger than God. A records clerk in Poughkeepsie said she once caught a strange man scanning a list of IRS pardoned fraud cases. When she asked if he was doing research, he smiled and said, "Just closing the open ones." He left behind a notebook filled with numbers that didn't add up to anything until she ran them through a calculator backwards. The result? The date her brother died. He had been an accountant. In 2017, a fire broke out in the archives of the New York State Office of Financial Investigations. It destroyed 3 floors of records, but one box was spared. It was marked the Moonlight File. No one remembered who filed it. Inside were redacted case summaries from 1972 to 2004, cases tied to suspected financial misconduct involving individuals who died before charges were filed. Each file had a post-it stuck to the back page. Each note bore a single word, stamped in fading blue ink. Adjusted. In 2020, a man resembling Alan Blythe was reportedly seen entering a condemned building in New Jersey, once a bank, now shuttered. He was carrying a large black ledger. A teen who'd been urban exploring followed him in. Claimed the man walked into the vault, placed the ledger on the floor, and turned to him. He said, "You can stop counting when it no longer matters. Until then, someone has to keep the numbers honest." Then he was gone. No sound, no exit. The vault door was sealed shut, and yet no one found the man inside. Today, in a locked cabinet at a small-town library near Dobbins Ferry, there sits a forgotten ledger. No one is supposed to know it's there. It has no barcode, no record. But once in a while, someone finds it. And when they do, they flip through pages that feel strangely warm to the touch. Inside, names they recognize, their own sometimes. Written at the very bottom of the page, under all the calculations, balance, pending. If they wait long enough, they'll see the number shift. If they blink, it resets. If they burn the book, it shows up again somewhere else. Because the moonlight ledger doesn't disappear. It moves, patient, orderly, unrelenting. Some say Alan Blythe never vanished, that he simply moved into the columns he once tended, that in some corner of this world or just outside of it, there was a room with no windows, no doors, no clocks, just a desk, a single candle, and a man in a brown coat who writes by hand long into the quiet night, turning debts into echoes and guilt into silence. And if you listen just at the edge of sleep, you might hear the soft turning of a page. Story 3. The Freezer Case, Marie Leclerc's silent house. The house on Wren Street had always been quiet. It wasn't abandoned, not quite, but it lived like it was. Curtains always drawn, no lights in the windows, no sounds from within. It stood at the edge of Sable Hollow, a neighborhood that had once bustled with post-war optimism and now dozed in its retirement. The house didn't look threatening. Its bricks were intact, its roof sturdy, but the windows, they were always frosted, even in spring, even in summer, as if the cold had moved in permanently. Neighbors said it started in the winter of 1991, the year Marie Leclerc moved back in. She had been gone for 22 years. Left Sable Hollow in the summer of 1969. She was barely 19 then, bookish, pale, polite, known for walking to the library in the same brown coat, no matter the season. Marie was the kind of girl who disappeared in photographs. You only noticed her in the background, between shadows. No one knew exactly where she went. She didn't send postcards, didn't call. Her mother, Estelle, lived alone in that house until her death in 1989. And 2 years later, quiet as snowfall, Marie returned. No moving truck, no announcement. She simply appeared one morning, unlocking the front door with a single suitcase and a pair of gloves. She didn't speak to neighbors, didn't wave, didn't shop at the local market. When the mail began piling up, she filed a request with the post office. Hold delivery. Indefinitely. At first, people made excuses. She's grieving. She's private. She's just getting reacquainted. But then came the sounds. Humming. Software repetitive, like a lullaby. Sometimes a creak, a drawer opening, closing, and occasionally the sound of a freezer humming deep into the night. Not a refrigerator, a freezer, thick, mechanical, like the one Estelle had kept in the basement. By 1995, no one in Sable Hollow had seen Marie in over 3 years. No footsteps, no packages, no signs of life. But the curtains still shifted, the power bill was still paid, and the frost on the windows remained. That summer, 2 teenage boys broke in on a dare. They didn't go far, just into the kitchen. What they saw was enough. A table with one place set, a chair with fresh indentations in the cushion, and an old chest freezer in the corner humming steadily, its lid wrapped with thick black tape. A chair pushed up against it, like someone didn't want it opened, or didn't want what was inside to get out. They ran, told no one for a year. Eventually, the story leaked out. It became a neighborhood ghost tale until the spring of 1997, when Marie Leclerc was officially reported missing. The call came from a woman named Eloise Cross. She had worked with Marie in the early 70s at a rural medical archive in Vermont. Hadn't spoken to her since 1982. But that April, she received a letter. No return address, just her name, written in a careful, deliberate hand. Inside, if anyone comes asking questions, tell them I was here the whole time. If they don't believe you, give them the red key. It's under the floorboard. Tell them the cold isn't mine. There was no signature, but Eloise knew the handwriting. It was Marie's. Local police entered the house a week later. No forced entry, no signs of struggle. The kitchen still looked lived in. The place setting was there. Clean fork, white plate. But the freezer, the tape had been cut. And inside, nothing. No ice, no food, just a perfectly clean interior. Empty, except for a single object in the center. A red key. And taped to the lid, facing inward. Do not follow the frost. It forgets where it starts. When the red key was submitted into evidence, no one could figure out what it belonged to. It wasn't from the house, not from the freezer, not from any cabinet, closet, or attic box. The teeth were too old, the metal worn in a way that suggested thousands of turns, but it was utterly foreign to the LeClaire property. And the tag attached? It didn't say garage or locker or safe. It just read, Cold File, 1974. That label cracked something open, not the case. The town. Sable Hollow didn't have a full-time records department, just a shared basement room below the town library where paperwork from the past 50 years was kept in color-coded folders. Blue for zoning, green for tax liens, yellow for marriage records, and red for inactive files, unresolved incidents, complaints that were too strange or too minor to escalate. Most of it was kids spray painting barns or old folks calling in ghost stories during thunderstorms. But in the summer of 1997, a clerk named Jonah Glass began combing through the red folders one by one, trying to locate the cold file Marie had referenced. It took 3 weeks, and what he found was not one file, but 3, all dated 1974. Each one marked in the upper corner with a small blue ink stamp, MC74 FRZ. The first file was brief, a report from a delivery driver who claimed to have dropped off an industrial-grade freezer at the LeClaire residence in April of 1974. The recipient? Estelle LeClaire, Marie's mother, signed for under a different name, M. Cresswell. The company's notes indicated she paid in cash. No questions. The freezer was larger than average and required a reinforced base, which Estelle had already constructed in the basement prior to the delivery. No other purchases in the area were recorded under that alias. The second file was stranger. A complaint filed by a neighbor in September of 1974 about mechanical noise and a rotten smell coming from the LeClaire home. The responding officer noted that upon arrival, the house smelled of bleach. Marie answered the door. She was 23. She reportedly told the officer that the smell was from cleaning old meat and that the noise was just the pipes acting up again. No follow-up was conducted. The report was closed with a note. Caller prone to exaggeration. No sign of distress. Young woman polite but distant. The third file was never supposed to exist. It had no number, no signature. Just a single sheet of yellowed paper stapled to a photo. The photo showed a hand, gray, waxen, half embedded in a block of ice. The sheet read, MC74 FRZ, sample 2 of 4. Content stored under Dobbins Clinic until further transfer can be arranged. Do not thaw. Specimen preserved under experimental freeze protocol. Access restricted to cleared personnel. LeClaire Marie, observer. Tia Cresswell, M. Custodial tier. At the bottom, scrawled in black pen, Returned to vault only with red key. There was no record of a Dobbins clinic anywhere in county databases. No address, no license, no tax records. But the name echoed something from decades earlier. Back in the early 1970s, Dobbins Hollow was the name of a rural farming settlement 20 miles north of Sable Hollow, largely abandoned now, the land overgrown with thorn brush and pine. Old residents spoke of a medical research building, small and unofficial, where experimental trauma treatments were tested in secret during the Vietnam era. The place had no sign, just a road that stopped at a chain. The building, they said, was cold inside, unnaturally so. They called it the Fridge. Locals believed it was government-run, but there were no logos, no uniforms, just silence and white coats. In August of 1997, a private team of investigators working with the county, quietly, without headlines, went out to what remained of the Dobbins Clinic. They found the building partially collapsed, moss over the walls, roots growing through the stairwells, wind whistling through the broken windows like breath. But the basement, still intact and locked with a rusted red keyhole. It took 2 hours to match the key Marie left behind. When they opened it, they found what was later described as a corridor of preservation. 4 upright freezers, all custom built, bolted into reinforced concrete. Only one still functioned. Freezer number 3. Inside, nothing. Empty shelving, cold fog, but stuck to the back interior wall, held by a single rusted nail, was a sheet of ledger paper. Names, codes, weights, temperatures, all marked with dates spanning from 1972 to 1974. And at the bottom, specimen M4CL/status, removed/custody. M. LeClaire, preservation transfer complete, November 14th, 1974. Marie had taken one of the samples, preserved it in her home, in her mother's basement, for over 20 years. No one ever confirmed what or who was preserved in that freezer. But fingerprints pulled from the interior lid matched an unsolved missing persons case from 1973. A man named Lyle Crossman, age 42, profession orderly. Last seen working at a private care facility near Dobbins Hollow. The place, unofficially known as the Fridge. There's something strange about silence. When it lingers too long, it stops being absence and becomes texture. Weight. You can feel it pressing against the walls of a room. That's what the investigators described when they entered Marie LeClaire's house a second time after the red key discovery. No police tape, no damage, just a kind of hushed pressure, like the house had learned to inhale and never exhale. They focused on the freezer first. Despite having been opened weeks earlier, it remained just as they'd left it, empty, clean, bone cold. The surface of the interior walls had developed a new layer of frost since its last inspection. But this frost was patterned. Closer examination revealed subtle grooves, like someone had once run their fingers down the back wall again and again in identical paths. 5 lines, vertical, uneven spacing. Each line ended in a tiny circular swirl. Investigators initially dismissed it as freezer burn or melted packaging remnants, but a forensic artist enhanced the indentations. What emerged looked disturbingly like a handprint, not pressed into the frost, but growing from it. The team next turned to the chimney. It hadn't been used in decades. Bricks were soot-stained and brittle, but at the very top, tucked behind a rusted metal grate, Something was wedged between the stones. A cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside, pages, dozens of them, yellowed, torn, edges charred, drawings, some pencil, some ink, mostly human figures, thin, angular, all posed as if frozen in mid-reach, heads tilted upward, mouths open. Some of them were labeled. Still before breath. Sister of vapor. Memory in sub-zero. Don't open unless you're colder than what's inside. Most disturbing was the central drawing. A large figure seated in front of an open freezer. But the body was wrong. Limbs too long, neck curved back unnaturally. From the open freezer lid, smoke poured out. But instead of obscuring the figure, the smoke shaped it, coiling around the arms and legs like sentient mist. In the corner of the drawing, Marie had written, "She speaks only when sealed." That same week, a new letter arrived, postmarked from a remote town in upstate New York. The return address was simply LeClaire. Inside the envelope, a cassette tape labeled 1975/contact/2:17 a.m. The voice on the tape was faint, warped, as if recorded through layers of ice, but there were two voices, one male, one female. The male voice spoke first, nervous, whispering. "Okay, recording now. Marie, if this works, if this really works," then silence, faint humming. The same lullaby neighbors once heard late at night. Then the female voice. "You didn't close the lid." A pause, crackling static. "She's looking." Then the male voice again, shaken. "Who's she?" A long breath. Then Marie's voice once more. "She's the memory. She lives beneath zero. If you open it too fast, she leaves. If you open it too slow, she waits. But if you listen, she tells you what the others forgot." Then something knocked in the background. 3 knocks, and the tape went dead. Marie LeClaire had been preserving something in that freezer, not just a body, not just evidence, a message, maybe a voice, maybe a presence. The strange markings in the frost, the humming heard by neighbors, the grooved handprints, the whispers in the walls. It all suggested the same chilling theory. Whatever had been inside the freezer had never truly left, even after Marie opened it, even after she disappeared. One investigator, Anna Portman, began suffering from severe night terrors following her 3rd visit to the house. She claimed to hear a woman humming at the foot of her bed. Always the same melody, always at 2:17 a.m. She began drawing spirals in her sleep, found herself sleepwalking into the kitchen at night and opening the refrigerator, never remembering. The department suspended her for her safety. 6 months later, she went missing. Her apartment was locked from the inside. No signs of struggle, just a note on the kitchen table, written in frost. Freezing isn't forgetting. It's remembering slowly. And in the freezer compartment, a single Polaroid of Marie LeClaire standing outside the Dobbins Clinic in 1974, smiling, but her eyes were wrong, unfocused, as if looking through the camera, not at it. And behind her, barely visible in the reflection of a window, a long shape, pale arms, mouth open, fingers curled around the edge of the glass. There's something terrifying about a place that remembers without witnesses. Marie LeClaire's house had become such a place after years of dead ends, silent rooms, and the unsettling hum of something unseen. The investigation was considered cold, officially. Unofficially, no one wanted to step foot inside again. But in 2002, something changed. A letter arrived at the Sable Hollow Town clerk's office, addressed to no one. No return address. just a scrawl in blue ink on the envelope. Release her. Inside was a small metal object, a second key, green. Attached was a brittle note. For the ice that won't melt. It was signed unmistakably, Marie. Investigators were granted access to the LeClaire home one final time. The house was unchanged, still silent, still sterile, still cold. But in the basement, something had changed. The freezer's surface was no longer frosted. Instead, the metal was streaked with condensation, like breath pressed against a mirror. They opened it, expecting emptiness. But this time, inside lay a small wooden box, wrapped in thick wax paper. Within the box, a reel-to-reel tape, fragile, labeled Her Voice, Final. They transferred the audio. What played was not music, not speech, but a series of patterns, tones, rises and falls, like a machine learning how to speak. And then, near the end, a woman's voice, Marie's, clear, calm, tired. To whoever hears this, I didn't preserve death. I preserved the moment before. When he asked me what it would mean to hear what the silence knew, I said yes. I said yes too quickly. I thought I could contain it. But silence is a pressure, and pressure remembers everything. A long pause. Then, I tried to keep her still. I sang to her. I kept her below zero so she wouldn't finish the sentence. But time still works in frozen places. And she has waited, and she knows your names now. A burst of static. Then, the hum is not the freezer. It's her trying to speak. Do not listen too long, or she'll finish the thought. The tape ends with a faint click. Then a sound not heard on any other tape from the property. A long, drawn-out exhale. Following the recording, the freezer stopped working. The hum, present for over 2 decades, ceased. The power to the entire house remained intact, but the basement chilled below freezing without mechanical aid. The temperature dropped unnaturally, confirmed by thermal sensors. No source could be found. Eventually, the house was sealed, declared structurally and environmentally uninhabitable. But strange events didn't stop. In 2004, a new family moved into the neighborhood. They had a 6-year-old daughter named Lily. One winter night, during a blackout, she claimed she saw a woman outside their window, not standing, floating. She said the woman was singing in numbers. When asked to explain, Lily hummed something no one recognized. The girl's mother recorded it. A local audio technician who analyzed the melody later confirmed the tones corresponded exactly to the final sequence of beeps from Marie's reel-to-reel tape, only reversed. One final note was found in Marie's handwriting, recovered behind a wall panel in the kitchen during the home ceiling, written in block letters. Frozen is a form of prayer, and I prayed too hard. Beneath it, a sketch of a freezer with a mouth and eyes, and a tongue made of frost curling out and whispering a phrase. The phrase was smudged, but legible. You opened it too late. Marie LeClaire was never found. Not her body, not a trace, only recordings, drawings, echoes in ice. To this day, Sable Hollow locals avoid walking past the LeClaire house during winter. The frost still returns to the windows, even though there's no heat. Even though the house was disconnected from the grid in 2006, some nights around 2:17 a.m., if you're close enough, you might hear it. That low hum, the hum that isn't mechanical, the hum that waits, the hum that remembers, and somewhere deep beneath the basement floor, buried in concrete, there's something frozen still trying to thaw. Not because it wants to live, but because it wants to finish its sentence.